to gather together, especially in this topic that is
Pues
important to
la
everybody.
primera temporada de
The
Puentes, que ha
first
sido
season of
una
Bridges,
serie de
Puentes,
charlas
which is a series
en
of
la que trato de
talks
indagar
in which we
sobre qué
try to
significa ser dramaturgista
delve
en
deeper into
México,
what being a
qué significa la
dramaturg
palabra para
means in
nosotros
Mexico.
o
What
cómo se puede
does that word mean
transformar.
to us, and how do we put that in
Hoy
practice,
es de
into
verdad un
practice?
verdadero privilegio para
Today
mí
is quite a
compartir este
privilege to
espacio con
share
estas mentes,
this
cerebros y
space with
corazones
these
que
minds,
han
brains, and
puesto mucho
hearts
de sí, de
that
sus
have
conocimientos
put
y su
so much
experiencia en esta
into
serie
this, their knowledge
y
and their
que hoy nos
experience into
permiten
this series.
indagar un poco más sobre qué significa
We
el
want to delve deeper
dramaturgismo en
into what
México, qué significa ser dramaturgista,
dramaturg
poner en práctica
dramaturgism is in Mexico and
eso
to put
en
into
nuestro
practice
país. Les voy a
everything
recordar
that
de
we've
una
done
forma muy rápida y
in
que
our
quizá no
country.
alcance
And I'm going to tell you,
a
not in a
abarcar, ¿no? A
very
condensar toda la
light
trayectoria
way,
de las
everything
personas que
that
me
we have
acompañan el día
done,
de hoy.
everything that
Lo voy a
these people
intentar
have
hacerlo.
done, but I will try to give you
Nuestra primera
a summary of it
participante
all.
es Marta
Our
Herrera Lazo.
first
Ella ha
participant is
trabajado como
Marta Herrera
dramaturga,
Lazo. She has
docente,
been a
traductora,
dramaturg,
dramaturgista
translator,
e
teacher,
investigadora de teatro
playwright,
en
and
México,
researcher of theater
Canadá y
in
Estados
Mexico,
Unidos.
Canada,
Es
in the United
egresada del
States.
Colegio de Literatura Dramática y
She
Teatro de la UNAM,
comes
es
from the
maestra en teoría
Teatro
teatral por la Universidad de
School
British
of the
Columbia,
UNAM. She
Vancouver,
is also a
y
teacher from the
doctora en
British
estudios
Columbia
de
University
performance por la Universidad
and
de
has studied
California,
performance
Berkeley.
arts by the University of California, located
Gracias,
in
Marta.
Berkeley.
Presente.
Thank you, Martha. Here I am.
Ana Lola Santana es profesora de
Ana Lola
teatro y
Santana is
performance
a
en el
teacher,
Departamento de
theater
Español
teacher, and performance
y
teacher at
Portugués
the
de
Spanish
Dartmouth
Department
College
at Portuguese
en Estados Unidos.
Department of
Su más
Dartmouth
reciente libro,
College in the
Freak
United States.
Performances,
The latest book, Freak
un poco de
Performances,
contexto.
is
Freak es
focused
figura
in
de
the use
política
of
pública en la
freaks as a
dramaturgia.
political figure in
Ha
performance
trabajado
in
como
theater. She has
dramaturgista y
worked as
traductora en varias
a translator and
producciones
dramaturg
y es
in
parte de la
several
compañía teatral
theatrical
mexicana
productions
Teatro de
and is
Ciertos
part of
Habitantes.
the
Gracias,
company
Ana Lola.
Teatro de Ciertos Habitantes. Thank you, Ana
Alfredo
Lola.
Michel Modenesi, él es
Alfredo Michel
profesor de
Modenesi
teatro
is
y
a theater
traducción de la
teacher
Universidad
and
Nacional
translator for
Autónoma
the
de México, la
National
UNAM,
Autonomous University of
como
Mexico,
traductor
the UNAM,
escénico
as a
y
scenic
dramaturgista.
translator
Ha
and
publicado,
dramaturg.
enseñado y
He has
editado
published and
conferencias y
taught and
conferencias sobre
edited
Shakespeare,
all sorts of
teatro,
talks
traducción
in
y
Shakespeare,
cine
theater,
en
and translation,
diversísimos
and
lugares,
film in
incluidos
many places,
Cambridge,
including
Oxford,
Cambridge,
España, Francia,
Oxford,
Italia,
Spain,
Alemania,
France,
Brasil,
Italy,
Chile y
Germany,
Grecia.
Brazil, and Mexico,
Es
amongst
miembro de
others.
varios
He's
comités
a
de
member of several
selección en
committees that
MIT,
include the
Cambridge University
MIT,
Press,
Cambridge
la
University Press,
Universidad de
and
Barcelona.
the
Ha
University
traducido
of
más de
Barcelona. He has
45
translated
obras
over
tanto para el estreno
45
como para su
plays
publicación.
for both the
Gracias,
scenes and
María.
for their publication.
María de Lourdes Guzmán
Maria
González
Lourdes
es
Guzmán
egresada de
González
licenciaturas en
comes from the
psicología y en
University of
literatura dramática y
Psychology
teatro
and
teatral. Ha sido
Dramaturgy at the
dramaturgista en varias
Autonomous
puestas en
University of
escena
Mexico.
desde
He has been a
2015.
dramaturg from
Desde su
several
fundación, el
places,
Centro de
2015.
Prevención
He is
de
assistant
Redes de
director and
Dramaturgistas
he
de
is a
Compañías
person responsible of
Teatrales,
networks and dramaturgist
formó
for the
parte
Lasalle Theater
de los
Company.
comités del
She's part
Congreso
of the
LMDA
Congress of the
2020 y
committees
2021.
for
Es directora de
LMDA 20 and
operaciones del
2021.
equipo fundador del MDA
And
México. Participó en
she
el
is the founder
coloquio
of the
La
Mexico team, and
digitalidad ha
she
revelado y
participated
dramaturgia
in the
nuestros
colloquium of what the
cuerpos,
digital world has
Teatro entre
revealed
las piedras,
for
una
dramaturgy from
rebelión
Teatro entre las
dramaturgista
Piedras
de
and
Huitlamargo.
the dramaturgic
Desde la
rebellion of
escena en
Huitlamargo.
2020 el
From the
conversatorio
scene in 2020,
sobre
she participated in the
investigación en
conversation
artes
topic
escénicas
discovering
de
research for scenic arts
EO
of the
en 2020.
NTSAO
Gracias, Lourdes.
2020.
Gracias,
Thank you,
Gabriela.
Lourdes.
Gabriela Aparicio es
Gabriela
dramaturgista,
Aparicio
profesora
she's a
mexicana,
dramaturgist
licenciada en literatura dramática y
and a
teatro por la
teacher
UNAM.
from
Desde
theater
2012
at the
coordina y
Autonomous
promueve la
University of
práctica
Mexico. Since
profesional. Ha
2011, she
participado
promotes
en
the work of
conversatorios desde
dramaturgs.
Chile,
She
Estados
has
Unidos, Guatemala
participated
y
in
México.
summits in
Es
Chile,
ganadora del
Guatemala, and
Field
Mexico.
Grant
She's the winner of the
2019
Field
del
Grant
MDA con el
2018 for
proyecto
the
de
LMDA,
extensión En
with
busca
the
del dramaturgista en
Expedition
México.
Project in
Y
the search of the
actualmente
Mexican
imparte
dramaturg.
el taller de
And she
investigación
now
teatral
teaches the
en la plataforma de
theatrical
disciplinas
research
teatralices.
workshop for
Desde
Teatralicity
2015
in
es
Chile.
integrante del
Since
colectivo
2015,
Euteria
she's part
Teatro.
of the Euteria
Gracias.
Teatro
Gracias,
Collective.
Euteria. Rocío Galicia, ella es
Rocio
dramaturgista,
Galicia, she's a
docente e investigadora
dramaturg,
titular del
teacher,
Centro
researcher
Nacional de
at the
Investigación
National Center
Teatral
of
Rodolfo
Theatrical
Celi,
Research,
donde
Rodolfo
coordina
Celi
la línea de
Center, in which
investigación
she
Cuerpos,
coordinates
Fronteras
the
y Violencias.
research
Algunos de sus libros
line
son Dramaturgia
for
Incorrecta en
bodies. She
2017,
has
Casi
written on
Muerte, Casi
dramaturgy
Vida,
in
Manifestaciones
2020
de
with
la
her book called
literatura
Casi Muerte,
dramática en
Casi
México,
Vida,
desde
Manifestations of Theater
2011 y
in the
Dramaturgias
Mexican
Fronterizas
Border, and
2018. for 2011 and 2018. She has been a teacher at several workshops and for the scenic arts. She's a coordinator of seminars and research groups centered in educated young researchers. Brenda Munoz, she's a playwright, dramaturg, and a freelancer. She has an MBA in communications and writing for film from the Vancouver Film School. She currently resides in Mexico City and works with the LMDA as the vice president of Mexico and coordinator of the 2021 Congress. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Ere. And thank you all for being part of this. I'm so excited. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the structure of today's conversation. Like any other talks we've had in Puentes, we tried to have this conversation the most casual way possible. And we wanted to put into practice our dramaturg inner being and try to listen, to exercise this listening skill. So we will have a series of questions. All of these will be directed to our participants and they will have 5 minutes to develop the answer. After that, a few of the participants can reply to that. This means that that can be linked to what has been said, or maybe that can show a complementary part of, or maybe a point of view that is located that stems from a different position. So let's start. First question goes to Marta Herrera. So how points do I get? How many points do I get? Just 2 points. So Marta, is it possible to define dramaturgism at least in Mexico? How would you define it? You have 5 minutes. You're the $1 million question. Well, every time somebody asks me this question, the first thing I tell them is that if you have no idea or have ever asked that about yourself, go to the LMDA website and read what dramaturgy is, which is a list of possible tasks so that you can, get to know what it is all about. I actually read it often, which is something that I usually don't do. But I'm going to use as a participation that we had at Puentes or Bridges, which is because the question is infinite. So I told myself when we participated, Ana Lola, Eri, and myself in a conversation at Puentes, we saw a few words and concepts that helped us in defining what dramaturgy is. We had the idea of developing the concept and the vision, a companionship effort that is through the director of maybe a play or the collective creation. But sometimes the figure of this director tends to be a lonely one. The dramaturgist involves that part of establishing a dialogue, the trust on whether some ideas are correct or not, and providing the space to develop a vision. And then this dramaturg becomes the link or the middle person between this concept and the rest of the teams or individuals within a project. So they become the purveyor of the concept that is being developed. A person that helps in make the decision making process. What happens during the performance, during organizing the performance? You usually have budgeting to think about, things that were not considered before, and sometimes this helps us in thinking, we have to make the decisions, we have to delve deeper, and it helps us in making the decisions when we do the setup. We also thought of contextualizing things. You are the person that is contextualizing things, the bridge between the text, the context and the text. What it means for this specific audience, what it means to do for this people, and what does it mean to do that at a festival or towards the future, or maybe we'll have a new season. What would that entail as well? What changes? What is kept the same? This constant conversation between text and context. And another thing that came up, it has to do less to do with how dramaturgism is conceived and how an actual dramaturg is, and that is adaptability, to be adaptable to processes, to be adaptable to work team working teams, to make something different out of a specific text, and that adaptability will allow us to make sure that the concept is realized, to purvey the concept, to help in the decision making process, and contextualize the work that is being done. I still have a minute to go. Okay, you can end there. I think that's it. Because what I wanted to say though is that when we were talking, these three people here that day, that was the definition. Those are the points that cropped up. Why? Because when it comes to adaptability, it has a lot to do with what process you're dealing with. Even if you're working within the same teams, for every process, it's like what you do with your partner. Every day is a new relationship, right? So it's the same thing. In a way, you have to understand that adaptability. And the three people that were talking that day in this conversation, having a dialogue on this, there were several things that were happening within our processes as dramaturgs that led us to this conversation. However, if we were to have this conversation again, the definitions might be different. Thank you, Marta. Now, this is, as I told you, a sort of a game. The first person who raises the hand will can reply to that. Don't raise your hand because that's only a Zoom thing, right? And we don't want to deal with that anymore. So the first person to talk, you said, Marta, that if you were to have this conversation any other day, the definition would have changed. I believe that for oh, it was a nod. We were okay with that. We're having this conversation again, and I'm sure that we will again change the definition of dramaturgism and continue to expand it even. A phrase that I read at the one of Gabriela Paris's tests was that the dramaturg helps philosopher to structure their ideas, and I do believe that in this process we do have a lot of philosophers, people who are collaborating. And I like what you're saying. The dramaturg helps the philosopher in structuring their ideas. And in a room filled with philosophers in which nobody understands each other, it is important to have a person there that says, okay, let's stop, let's take a breather, and let's make a decision that is informed. And I like that. I want to continue to define that. I would like to hear yet another definition. If you had five words to define dramaturgy, what would you say? So, Ana Lola, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Sorry about that. Well, I do believe that there is an infinite amount of words that can define that. Five is just too few for that. And what Marta is saying, well, it depends on on what type of project you're working on. For me, this is something individual because I'm working with a company, and I believe that Lourdes, that is the same. Every project requires something different from you, and I have to learn to be very flexible, to understand that sometimes I am working with musicians, sometimes I'm working with actors. So it depends on whom you're working with, and that would be what would be required of you. So giving you a definition, like we said before, I'm always based on that phrase by Mark Blind. I don't know how to define it. If you caught it, would bleed me. Do you know what I'm talking about? Well, that's what I'm trying to say. I cannot define it, but if you caught it with a knife, it will bleed you. So that's how I understand it, how I define it. I cannot tell you what was my exact function at the time. Go, go. I like to think of the dramaturg as a person that becomes a bridge between the scenic affair and the other important and fundamental aspect, and that is the audience, the people who are going to watch. That is a definition that I love because this is the one I work with, and I believe that it is a way in which you open yourself to society, not only to stay there at the theater building, on the stage. It's actually start a dialogue. Starting a dialogue. What happens in all creative processes is very specific, an intimate affair, and sometimes people in the creative teams don't want to share that intimacy. And you understand that because at the end, what you're putting in line at the stage is truly intimate, very delicate, and painful. It's sometimes painful, and it is a way in which you look into the human being and you engage in conversation with the audience. Theater would have no meaning if there were no link with society, and I believe that's what's most important, to be this sort of a bridge of mediator, of a person that goes between these closed environments that can be a dark theater. This hall is these halls in which many things happen, and the creators don't have the opportunity to conceptualize, to review, to reflect upon, because their task is yet another to create. So a dramaturg is that person, that person that connects fiction with reality, that connects reality with fiction, and they are that bridge in which they come and go. This intense dialogue happens that should be established, because when you open the curtains, maybe you don't see anybody there in the audience. Why? Because they might not be there. And I believe this is one of the efforts that should be made by the dramaturg. Telling, guess what? What uh, is of interest to society is not what's happening here. There's maybe an intense dialogue. There's a need to approach certain topics from theater, and not just as a form of thought, but also as a specific place for sensations and affectation and feelings. So I believe that if there's a person that can work in these worlds of communicating both realities, then that would be lovely,
Muchas gracias,
ideal.
Rocío. Vamos a pasar con la
Thank
siguiente
you,
pregunta.
Rocio. We will go to
Esta
the
es para
next
Ana Lola
question. I
Santana.
believe this is for Ana Lola
Rocío,
Santana.
tú que tienes toda esta
Now that you
experiencia
have all
de
this
trabajar
experience in
en
working
otro lado,
here and in other so many other
¿qué
places,
dramaturgistas
are
eres?
the implications of being a
Lo hice
dramaturg in
porque me
Mexico?
atreví porque a mí los nervios me
I
dan mucha
cheated. I
ansiedad.
had to jot it down because I get nervous. Sorry about
En
that.
exactamente 5 minutos.
I'm going to read something to
Ok.
you, but it is 5 minutes long, okay?
Herman Rapke, el
Tim
creador
Rapke,
alemán del país
German
donde se
creator,
gestiona el florecimiento
the
del dramaturgismo,
country in which
define la
dramaturgy
labor del
was
dramaturgista
born,
como
defines the work of the
una
dramaturg as
combinación de
a
escritor,
combination of
consejero literario y
his
escritor que
as
desarrolla y
writer
realiza
and
dramaturgia
literary
y
counsel in the way in
obra
which
de
they
teatro,
develop
además
the
de
vision of a
encargarse del
play,
repertorio
and they are
dramatúrgico y
also
su
in
difusión.
charge of the repertoire of the
Según
company
Rapke,
and
entre las responsabilidades de un
their
dramaturgista
publicity.
están
Amongst the
en
responsibilities
cada
of the
época
dramaturg is the
decir,
definition of the
planteando, por
programming,
ejemplo, qué obras se
asking
adaptarán,
which
cuál
plays
podría
are
ser la
to be
lógica
set
del
up, what will
repertorio,
be
qué
the
obras
logic of the
estarían los otros
repertoire,
actores de la
what
función,
other
cómo se puede
theaters
trabajar
are
con
going
ellos, cómo
to, other
distinguir
plays
entre
are
los
going to
nuevos
happen,
autores
how
de
can they be
repertorio,
different from other
quiénes son
companies,
los
to have a
autores jóvenes a los que hay
specific
que prestar
profile, what are the
atención,
young
cómo se pueden
authors that you
mejorar
need to pay
nuestros
attention
actores
to,
en
and
el
how you're going
escenario
to
y
help
muchas
your
cosas más.
actors in
Esto
their development, and this is okay to
pero
be,
implica
but
que
it
el
also implies that
dramaturgista
the
lleva a cabo
dramaturg
un oficio
has
integral
an
para el
integral
arte
work to
teatral.
do when it comes
Pero
to the
también
scenic
implica
arts.
que se
And
trabaja
that
para una
also implies that you
institución
work for
como
an
ente oficial
institution or
que
official
requiera
company that
disciplinaridad y
requires
tareas.
these types of
Implica que hay
tasks
una
to
red
be
de
done.
teatros con
That is a
suficientes
network of
fondos
theaters
para
with
su
enough funds
funcionamiento
to
que
be
necesitan
functional
este
that
oficio.
actually need of this
Me parece
particular
que en
line of
México
work.
no
I
estamos
believe
ahí.
that in Mexico we have
Esto
yet
no
to
significa que no
get to
seamos
this place. That does
autosuficientes,
not mean that
pero el
their
quehacer
existence would
teatral
not be
está
possible, but
fuertemente
the
limitado
doings
por
of
cómo
theater
está
are still
estructurado el
suffering
trabajo de la
limits
dramaturgista
in
y del
budgeting, and this
profesional.
affects the professional
Primero que nada,
aspects
quiero
of
dejar claro que
dramaturgs.
no pretendo
First
ser la
off, I
portavoz
don't
del
want to be
dramaturgismo en
the
general o
voice
quien
or
gestione
give
la profesión
general
en México.
knowledge as to what it
Este es un
implies to be a
oficio
dramaturg in
evolucionado y
Mexico.
que
I
cada
believe that this
día,
is an
con motivo
evolving
de esta
profession,
conferencia,
and as
está
this
siendo
conference has
reconocido como
shown, it will
figura
be
esencial de
recognized
los
as an
teatros
essential
nacionales.
figure
En
for national
México,
theaters.
aún antes de que este
Mexico,
fuese
even
un
before this,
reconocido, la
was a
presencia de
recognized
dramaturgistas
term, the presence of the dramaturg was actually tangible, whether he was an extra official observer or official one. And I can tell you as my experience that I've had as a dramaturg, which has occurred in a very different way in which the institutionalization of the work has happened. I started my career in the United States at the end of the 90s with an NFA, which is called a Master of Fine Arts Dramaturgy from the University of California in San Diego. And I recognize that when I started the program, I had no idea as to what a dramaturg would entail. My career then started in the United States, my education. Then I started to work as a dramaturg in Mexican theater, specifically with Claudio Valdez Cori and his company Teatro de Ciertos Habitantes, with whom I continue to work with as of today. This has been quite the privilege that made me work as a dramaturg with other directors in Mexico. However, my main commitment is with the company. My work with ciertos habitantes implies some of the things that Rapke has talked about, but I am not in charge of the theatrical repertoire or the publicity. What I do, though, is linked to the way in which the company creates theater, which it has defined what I do for over the past 20 years. From the get go, I understood my function as a person in charge of giving context to the world of theater plays, to forge a critical link between the artists and the designers and technicians, to mediate conversations amongst directors, actors, and designers, and to establish connections between text actors and the audience. Although Ciertos Habitantes is a company that is in search of many things, focused on a process that would allow the artist to realize of their constant evolution alongside the play. This focus that I had traced for my work is the natural consequence of the methodology of creation by Valdez Puri. The work relationship that was developed required a high level of trust between Puri and myself because we need to maintain the fragile balance that is comprises imagination and the long work of setup through also a long period of criticism and study. The work of the company has been based on scenic research with a purpose and finding what human condition is all about through theatrical work. And this implies long processes of laboratory processes that go over 2 years that strive for participants to go through several internal external experiences. The reality of this method is that my work as a dramaturg constantly shifts in terms of the necessities of a play at hand. Claudia Varascuri takes us through unexpected places that are constantly expanding and enriching the definition of my work as a dramaturg. And based on my experience with other directors, I believe that this is exactly what implies to be a dramaturg in Mexico, to expand and to enrich our professional endeavors through the search of theatrical expression, and that should stay on top regardless of the what happens in the country negatively. That is, who would like to reply to that? First off, I want to congratulate myself because some of the questions that are coming up would be to me, and they would actually be similar to whatever you have said. So there would be no need to repeat myself. But this thing related to the conditions of doing dramaturgy in Mexico are not in a way the ideal situations, and by far not even comparable to those that happen in other countries in which theatrical institutions are actually well created. You said that these are official institutions, and I believe that the official aspect should be removed because these are institutions that have worked with all the means they have, and they have, in a way, survived so many tempests and storms that have happened for Mexican projects. I believe that it is extraordinary as well for a company like that of Valdez Curi has had that longevity and provide the opportunity to offer a minimal safety in terms of structure that they have this notion in mind, but they are the exception to the rule, however. And you would have to keep that in mind because they are also part of what causes the volatility that we have been talked about. previously, volatility that we can definitely enjoy because it is enjoyable. Everybody explains some form of enjoyment out of it. And in the end, what I do or not do as a part of that specific area of dramaturgy in this area can also be enjoyable. But how can you uh, lever up the structure in such a way that it actually fits the way in which it should fit to make sure that things actually happen, and that is the expansion of the consciousness of your participation, but also the practical results that also generate other synergy, so that our theater can become what we have dreamed of for so long. Again, I congratulate myself in the fact that this is very clear as water can be.
Tenemos tiempo por si alguien más
So I
quiere
have some time should anybody would like to talk. And now, when it comes to working as a dramaturg in Mexico, it is common that the people that work in theater also work in other type of media, in television and radio and films or what have you. So for me, it has been a very interesting experiment to become as a cover up, make a cover up work as a dramaturg because the word is just so close to theater, right? So it becomes a bit more complicated to come in with bearing the title. But what's interesting of this matter, however, is that it won't generate the need of of generating the work that we do, but it forces the teams to discover this type of work through doing things. And in this creative process, whether you're doing a content counseling for Netflix, for instance, or another project that it could be a lot more multimedia in nature, that would be not a play per se, even though it is, but as an immersive experience, if you will, which is anyway. But in a way, it tells you how you do the dramaturgy work as I described it here without actually naming it like that. And the teams themselves, as individuals, start to discover that endeavor as something that is actually happening. So they say, well, this happened, and I didn't never in these processes we had this or this types of conversations. So there's always that process of doing cover up work, and and of naming things the way they should be named. So have the name dramaturge there. That is a part, that is a process, and that is usually the battle that we have. And in my experience, it has been specifically that to become to do cover up work, because sometimes that's what theater does for you anyway. It is necessary also in other spaces, however, in Mexico, in other spaces of creation, not only in the scenic arts.
Muchas gracias, Marta.
Thank you,
Tenemos un
Uma.
minuto.
We still have a
¿A quién
minute
le
to
gustaría
go.
ocupar a propósito
Anybody
de ese
else
minuto?
would like to
Lo que dice
make the
Marta parece
most of
como si
that
el
minute? What
dramaturgismo
Mata is saying
parece como si el
as if
dramaturgismo
dramaturgy would
fuera un
be
acto performativo
a
en el que tienes que
performative
hacerlo para
act
que
in which you
sea,
have to do things
si
to make
no,
sure that they
sigue tu
actually
nombre que
happen,
se
and
hace
otherwise it
y
wouldn't
desaparece
exist
cuando se deja de
until
hacer.
it's done, and it
Me parece muy
disappears once it
interesante que en
happens.
un
So that I
currículum de
believe it is very
filósofos parece que el
interesting that in a
dramaturgista es
room filled with philosophers,
podrían ser otro filósofo
dramaturg
slash
would
actor
be the dramaturg slash actor
y
component.
y creo que me parece muy
And
interesante
I
porque hemos
also
hablado con
think it's
todos
very
de qué es
interesting because when we've
dramaturgista y quién
talked
se nombra
about
dramaturgista y
this with
no,
everybody, who is a
creo que el
dramaturg, who
experimento de
is
entrar
not, I think
encubierto,
the
yo
experience
lo
of
voy a hacer
going
mañana.
undercover, perhaps I will do that tomorrow.
Buenísimo, Brenda. Muchas gracias.
Great, Brenda. We'll look forward to
Vamos
that.
con la siguiente pregunta. Efectivamente
Next
es
question,
para
and in
Alfredo
effect,
Michel.
it is for Alfredo
Y
Michel.
esta, bueno, antes les cuento que cada
And
una de
let me
estas
tell you
preguntas
first
pues
that
está
each one of these
surgido
questions
de cada uno de los episodios de
emerged
Puentes en
from
los
the
que ellas
episodes
y
of
ellos han
Puentes,
sido
Bridges,
invitados.
in which they have
Así que si
been
quieren
guest
ver
speakers
un poco
for.
más de
So
eso,
if you want to
ir a
look
la página del
into
MDA
these
en el
topics more,
apartado de
delve into
Puentes
it,
y ahí
look
está.
into LMDA
Volvamos.
under Puentes, and you'll see
Entonces,
some of the
bueno,
videos there. So Alfredo, here's your question.
comportamiento de dramaturgista
The
o
behavior
dramaturgista.
of a dramaturg.
¿Cómo? ¿Por qué?
Who,
Una persona
how,
puede ser
when,
dramaturgo que
why
está en México.
can a person become a
Bueno, eso
dramaturg
de
in
comportamiento
Mexico?
dramaturgista,
Regarding the behavior of a dramaturg, I think this has to do with the Puentes program. In addition, there is a visual aspect that has to be taken into account here, and that reflects a cultural aspect in turn of this profession and our place in here. But there is something else that draws our attention, and I say this because in effect I am the eldest here amongst us. And what this means here is that there is an experience. This is not undercovered dramaturgy, but rather unknown. That is, that has not been identified as such, nonetheless was occurring, perhaps in my biographic notes. And here we would look at a translator for the stage and dramaturg. It would appear that this is partial because the effect here is that in my own interventions in the same areas, the total incomprehensible work of a dramaturg, I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other. Without ever saying this, I've given you an example, and this became a reality when I was the professor of a specific course. And this, when it came back to me, and I have gotten closer, and I insist in partial manner, this characterizes what I have done, primarily in an area that is very specific and also contrasts with other aspects when Ana Lola was talking about the origin of the word, etc., entails textual management, which the management of the text that becomes diluted into other areas and other ways of delving into the theatrical processes. Primarily, I have also approached it from the side of translation of text, particularly from English into Spanish and specifically Shakespeare, which have ended up constituting a certain awareness with those whom I'm working with of the need and existence of this figure. This has been gradual. I began with X, Y, Z, and they said, what do you have for us? Well, I'll turn over the production, but very likely you're going to need something else. And that is for me to say why, how, when, where, what's happening, where is it coming from? Because you're going to be facing things that if you look at them, it might be the result of something that continues to operate very firmly in our environment, and that is authoritarianism, verticality, centralism of processes. When a director of one of these people says, tomorrow I'm going to close the door for the practice room, rehearsal room, they do it. Something like that happened to me. In general, I don't work with people like that. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to have very good relationships with those whom I'm working with and have doors open for me. And what assuredly we all know must be, and there are other experiences here, and that is, on the one hand, the behavior that then leads to the next, who, how, when, where, why. I think that there is another aspect here that we must look at. We have to consolidate ways of education in theatrical environments that will create awareness for those whom are arriving and are curious. Where I work now, I worked in the English literature department, but now I work in the theatrical literature department. And there is a beginning, a sketch perhaps, an outline of education in this regard through theater courses. But what they need is to be fine-tuned, they need to be reworked. We need to perfect many of these activities so that they can do away with this authoritarian, central, vertical mandate here, so that when students want to come into this process, and in the past they have been rejected, the dramaturg says, look, you go get the coffee. That's what you're going to be doing here. This is a true story. And from that moment on, you realize that a lot has to be done to change this. And on the other hand, there's what I was also saying. How do we resolve the financial issue and stability issues of Mexican productions? Let's not call them companies, just production. In present day circumstances, what we cannot do is reject them, do away with them, nor can we reject the old patterns. And I think I have run out of time. Thank you, Alfredo. 5 minutes for a rebuttal. Who would like to reply here? I have something I want to say very briefly. The question makes me think of the fact that we could catalog who can be a dramaturg and who cannot. I don't know why we think that, why we think there's a list of characteristics that have to be met to be a dramaturg. But what Lola and Alfredo said regarding education, the lack of safe places, this is true of the theater environment here. There is no safe place for anyone here in theater, but something that has granted some stability for me is that precisely because of this type of reaction that Alfredo is talking about with young people, it is the young people who are driving these ideas. They seek other sources of work. The table that is closing today is Bruno's, and there you can see what the young people are doing. Something else that I note is that, at least in Latin America, it is women dramaturgs who are driving this activity of dramaturgy. Does anybody have anything else to add? I have something I will add. It's like the chicken and the egg. If you're saying that there is no safe place to produce theater in Mexico, neither for producers nor actors, I do believe and I have faith that dramaturgs create these spaces. So perhaps they don't exist and it would appear that there is no room for a dramaturg, but when a dramaturg does arrive and wreaks magic, we can create safe places. So if we look at that first undercover entrance here, that's a question for the audience as well. I think that something important here, and what I would like to add is that we began working without this preconception. So many of us started doing things that now, in due time, we find that can be conceived of as dramaturgy. But the fact that we didn't have from the onset this concept in place gave us a lot of freedom. So I really like the idea that this event is called Without Borders, because I think that is the place from where we are operating, without borders, or with borders but crossing borders. And this has to do with what you just said, Brenda. We're constantly constantly expanding, taking it further, proposing other ways of doing things. In this regard, I think that we are inventing and writing our own dramaturgy of the term in Mexico. We haven't finished, and that's a good thing because that gives us a chance to constantly improve, to keep it alive, dynamic, to redesign it, rework it, tailor it, render it subjective where needed, and that is of the essence. We had a talk with the young people from Dramaturgy Rebellion with Jose and Bruno. And when I was looking at the images here of Puentes, these bridges, the name of this program, it has to do with art and stage in the 21st century. But there is something that reminds us of the codexes and of the Malinche and our Aztec roots, that indigenous woman who became the translator between the original peoples, the indigenous groups, and the world of the Spanish conquerors. And with her ease of mastering languages, she became that bridge, that translator. And that is how I think, and I'm throwing this out there because I think it's a very provocative proposal and very entertaining to think that she has been our very first dramaturg. And as a Mexican, this woman who brings two cultures into touch through language, through translation, who knows how to read and understand what's happening on one side and adapt it to the context. For many years, this figure, this person, the Malinche, was misconceived and misthought of. But even at this historic level today, we now find that she is a very valuable personality. And from here, I think of her as that first dramaturg. And she had the possibility of bringing together two worlds. Okay, so if we were to bring La Malinche to this day and age, quite definitely she wouldn't be playing that role of just being a translator of a language. She would be a translator of cultures, a translator of languages in the broadest sense of the term. I find that fascinating. And that is why we believe that dramaturgy in this country is just now being invented every single day. And insofar as this keeps happening, it is a sign of life. Thank you, Rocio. Ana Olga, do you have something to add? Ana Lola, yes. Next question is for Lourdes Guzman. Lourdes, which do you think is the work of the dramaturg in production processes? What does the dramaturg do in Mexico? That's good. I'm glad that you have said Mexico because that's the only place I know anything about. Well, I think that although my experience isn't that new, I think that it is shorter than that of other companies present here today. But in my experience, this entails preparation. This isn't something that you can improvise. This isn't something that somebody with goodwill can undertake. And of course, you can, but it doesn't stop there. Goodwill. I think it's also important to recognize the preparation required in order to carry out the work. The flexibility, which has also been mentioned, because in each case, something different is going to occur. You need different things in place, depending on each work, each production, each place and time. But let me go back to something specifically mentioned by Ana Lola, and I believe that it is relevant, and that is trust. We can achieve nothing without trust. The scope of what we can do would be very limited if we didn't have trust in our work team, if we didn't have the chance to keep doors open, to have a voice that can be heard, and make certain decisions. I also think about flexibility, without a doubt. Respect comes into play and expressed in many different ways. One might be pay, the way in which we value our work, and make sure that it is not just something that we do out of love and in good faith and goodwill, but that we may be able to support ourselves. I think dramaturgy needs to be grounded much more firmly in Mexico. I think that we have taken strides toward this, very clear strides, and there is more to be done yet. But I think that part of what is imperative here is that we not be mysterious. We need to render the work visible. We need to be open. We need to adjust. And in addition, we have to be very willing. I also think that this is entails generosity, willingness, but also important is that it be mutual. Let me add something that perhaps doesn't crop up very often, but very important. I think everything that I've heard is impressive, but at the same time, I think it's extraordinarily fun and entertaining. I think that there is curiosity all the time here. That was also present in the Dramaturgy Rebellion and in our school in drama and theater, and this curiosity that I think is a shared trait. Without curiosity, we would be unable to have this source of questions that drives us to imagine exactly what is happening, not just here, but also on the other side and in the middle. What are the dialogues that are possible to embark on? I'm not sure how much longer I have. 48 seconds. Very good. Let me finish then. So overall, I think that rendering this visible, what we're doing, has been very clearly stated with all of us present here today. And it's important to talk about variety. Alfredo mentioned it a moment ago. I marvel at the possibility of being able to convene here with people who are from generations that have come before mine, with people who are my generation, with younger people, and with different perspectives from Mexico, from abroad, and many different possibilities out there, and many, many prospects. For example, I remember, Rocio, you also emphasize philosophy, and I think that this is fundamental support, because what we have in common here is asking questions. And ultimately, I think it's imperative to recognize that this is teamwork always. We would never be able to conceive of dramaturgy carried out alone. Thank you, Lourdes. I want to answer what Lourdes has said because I want us to add more to that concept of trust. In my experience, with students and how we enter into these creative spaces without being sent just to go and get the coffee. At the end of the day, since my process, the creative process, is vulnerable, everybody's creative process is vulnerable because creation is opening up and becoming vulnerable in order to expand. So I think trust is of the essence. I very often recommend that we must work as dramaturgs with people who already trust us.
Parte de la base de tus
Part of
relaciones que son
stem from the basis of your
relaciones sanas, abiertas y
relationships,
de confianza.
healthy, open
Y de ahí, a lo
relationships
mejor,
based on trust.
estableces después una
Perhaps there,
relación
then you can establish
directora-directorista, ¿no?
a relationship
Pero en
as
esto
a
de la
director
confianza, para mí
or a
también es
dramaturg.
esto que decía
And
Alfredo,
trust
tenemos
for me is
jerarquías,
like
¿no? Las
what
maneras
Alfredo
de
said. There are
trabajar
hierarchies,
que
there are
son muy
ways of
cerradas,
working
¿no?
that
Muy,
are
muy
very
cerradas. Y a
closed.
veces digo, bueno,
And
¿qué tanto el esfuerzo
sometimes
es
then we
tratar
must
de abrir
say,
algo que, o sea, ya,
what
o sea,
does
lo
it
abrimos por
entail
abrir
to
la
open
llave, ¿no?
something
Como
up?
llave, no
The
hay
key
por
was
dónde abrir,
lost.
no hay por dónde
There's
entrar,
nowhere
¿no?
to go in
Y
and
cuando se
open it
tiene el
up. The key
privilegio
has
de
been
poder
lost.
trabajar
And
con
when you
quien
have
se
the
trabaja
privilege
bien,
of
es una
working
maravilla, ¿no?
with whom you
Pero
work well
también,
with,
o sea,
that
planteo
is
la pregunta en
marvelous.
términos de nuestra
The question
docencia,
arises
¿no? O
in
sea,
terms of our teaching and
¿cómo
our
enseñamos a
preparation.
generar esa
How do we
confianza? ¿Es algo que
teach
se enseña? ¿A quién
trust?
se le
Is it
enseña?
something that
¿Cómo
you
se le enseña? ¿No?
teach?
Porque es a
How is
partir
it
de
taught
eso
and to whom?
que todo
It
lo
is
demás
based on
sucede.
this that
Y
everything
cuando
else
ya
will
se abre la
transpire.
puerta de la
And once
confianza al
that door of
dramaturgista, se
trust is
vuelve
opened
la
up for
mayor
the
confianza,
dramaturg,
muchas veces,
it
que se
becomes
tiene en el
the
equipo. La persona
greatest
a la que más
trust.
confianza se le
The
tiene
person that you
es a la
most trust
dramaturgista, a
is
la
the
que se le puede
dramaturg.
decir, hacer todas las preguntas.
The person
Sin
to whom
ninguna
you can
pregunta
ask
tonta, ¿no? O sea,
anything
con
of.
esa persona se tiene toda
With
la
that
confianza.
person, you have
Entonces,
full
digo, lo
trust.
planteo así como que al aire,
And
¿no?
I'm
Y esa
throwing
confianza
this
qué,
out
cómo,
there.
dónde, ¿no?
That
¿Qué se
trust,
come?
where,
Creo que es
when,
un punto de
how,
partida
why,
muy
is a
importante,
starting
¿no?
point
Y
that
sobre
is
todo en el
of the
contexto del
utmost
cómo
importance,
enseñamos,
particularly in the
cómo
context
formamos o
of
cómo nos
how we
formamos en
teach and
esta
how we are
rama.
trained and raised up in this work.
Si puedo yo añadir.
Sí, adelante.
No, porque me
Could,
parece
could I
súper
add something?
interesante lo que dices
Yes.
de
What you have said
la
is very
educación, ¿no?
interesting
El
regarding
proceso de educación.
education, the
Porque creo que
education
sí, por
process,
un
because
lado,
I do
hay
think that on
el
one
dramaturgista
side,
debe tener un entrenamiento,
dramaturgs
¿no? O sea, tienes que
must
tener
have
una
a
base, tienes
level
que
of
tener una
training.
formación.
You
Pero
have to
también
have
hay todo un
education and
proceso de
training. But
educar
there's another process of
alrededor
educating
sobre cuál es nuestro trabajo.
around
Aquí
our
un
work.
poco
And
de
here,
anécdota, pero
in an anecdotal manner, let me tell you
a mí
the
me tocó
following.
hacer me pidieron
I was
el
asked,
Cambridge Encyclopedia of Stage Directors.
the
Me
Cambridge
pidieron que hiciera la
Encyclopedia of
sección de
Stage
México.
Directors asked me
Entonces
to
me tocó
produce the
entrevistar
section on
a
Mexico.
muchísimos
So I
directores,
interviewed many directors, many
mucha información,
producers,
persona, etcétera. Y
and a lot of these,
Okay, lo que sucedió aquí es
a lot of what happened was that it was hard to get in touch with them. I had to do some name dropping, and I'd have to tell them who I was and try to get them to answer my calls. What happened was that the first question is, "You're what? What do you do? Who are you?" So I had to explain what my work was, who I was, and two jobs came out for me from that experience. As a dramaturg, they were fascinated by the idea that such a profession existed when I told them what it was I did. So, this is something that we have to foster. We must write articles on what dramaturgy involves. We have to educate. And what you said, Gabriel, the new generations recognize this, but we have a whole lifetime behind us of people who have no clue of who we are nor what our work is. And it's wonderful to be able to teach them now that we exist for a reason and that we can make your life easier and you in ways that you never dreamed of by executing this process. Thank you, Ana Lola.
Pues yo no tendría que replicar ni nada, pero
I don't really have a reply here, but I want to add my voice to something.
Que creo que no se ha mencionado lo suficiente.
And I don't think that the following has been said enough, or it hasn't been as clear as it could be, and that is that a dramaturg always takes care of the integral process. That means explaining to others what you do over and over again, but also to awaken that trust and be there in the present, in the moment, listening and taking care of those who are on the other side. And that is something that means to work shoulder to shoulder with your whole heart and mind in something that is taking place right then and there. That was my reply. Next question, and it's for Gabriela Aparicio.
¿qué aporta el trabajo
What
del
does the work of the dramaturg
dramaturgista a las
contribute
otras áreas
to
dentro de
other
una
areas
producción?
within
Te voy
a
a pedir que
production?
me controles porque el tiempo para mí es y me emociona muchísimo.
Um,
Entonces,
I get really excited and passionate
pues es
and
que
forget the
esta
time,
pregunta
so
me ayuda,
keep
o sea, me
track of
abre
it, please.
muchísimos caminos
This
porque
question opens up
creo que
many
todo lo que
doors
se ha
here
dicho,
because I
pues
think of
no
all
es
that
que
has been
solo el
said.
dramaturgista hace una
We
cosa,
can't just
¿no?
say
Hemos
that
hecho
a
millones de
dramaturg
cosas.
does
Y creo que
one given
podríamos hacer
thing. We
una
do
mesa entera
thousands
para
of
decir
things.
el trabajo
We
del
could have a
dramaturgista
whole
con el
discussion on the
actor, con
work
el
of the
director, con el
dramaturg
escenógrafo, con el
with
diseñador
the
y sería
designer, with the
muchísimas
actor, with the producer, with the
pero creo
director,
que a
with
grandes rasgos
everyone,
respecto a
different
esto último que estás
roles we
diciendo,
play. But to
una
answer the
es el proceso
question,
que es
one
como
thing
acompañar el
is the
proceso, ¿no?
process
Estar ahí en el
of
proceso, pero sobre
working
todo
side by
ayudar a
side
encontrar
with the
un camino,
process, in the
¿no? Porque
process,
siempre estamos
finding a
ahí como
path.
para pues
We're always
mover,
there
orientar y en el mejor de los sentidos
to
podría ser esa
direct and
persona
in
que
the
ayuda a
best and
reafirmar,
move
a
and
estimular,
reaffirm,
a hacer seguro,
encourage,
pero que también es ese ente
be
malvado
a
que nos ayuda a
presence,
encontrar crisis y
and
quizás
also
bien,
help
bien
to
interesantes, ¿no? Porque todos los procesos
resolve
necesitan eso
crises.
también, ¿no?
All
Entonces
processes
creo
need someone to
que
do
pues a
that.
grandes rasgos es
And I
eso.
think in
Diría
major
que
terms, that's what it
por
is.
poner ejemplos así como
To give you
muy
some
simplones, diría, por ejemplo, el trabajo con el
easy
director,
examples, working
quizá
with the
es pues
director
justo
perhaps
reafirmar esa idea, o
is
sea,
to
como
reaffirm
recordarles
the
esa idea, porque a
idea,
veces se les olvida,
reminding them
en
what they are
el
doing,
trabajo con
because
el
sometimes
dramaturgo,
they
estas
forget.
conversaciones que mencionabas
And
ahorita, como
sustaining these
pues de
conversations
repente
as
de
a
asentar tus
dramaturg,
ideas y de que hay alguien que te está escuchando en ese
expressing your ideas
proceso.
and making
En
sure
el
that someone
camino
is
con el
listening
diseño, pues
and
estimulas de muchas
working with
cosas, ¿no? Pero
design
quizá
entails
en
many
cuestión de
different things.
investigación
So
podría ser
perhaps
ese ente que está ayudando a
regarding
unificar la
research,
estética y que puede ser
taking care
parte
of
de,
of
sí,
the
la guía
aesthetic
con los
part of
colores, las
it,
texturas, el
colors,
ambiente y todo lo que tenga
textures,
que tener unidad. Y
everything that
podríamos
has to be
también ver en cuestión de
harmonized.
la actuación
And
la
in
ayuda de
terms
todas esas
of
cosas, ¿no?
acting,
A través de
triggering
mi
things through
investigación, de
my
mi planteamiento,
investigation,
también
through
pueda
my
generar
proposals,
algo en el otro, ¿no? Puede ser que yo lleve un objeto y ese
foster
objeto le
something
produce
in
algo muy
somebody else.
interesante al
And this
actor,
produces something
pero
very interesting for the
también siento que
actor.
es, recuerdo a otros dramaturgistas diciéndome, es que es un
And
momento
I
de
also
frustración,
feel like
porque
this is
es como
a
ayudarle yo
great
al otro a
frustration.
florecer, a que sea grande y bello,
And
y yo me quedo atrás y no es visible,
perhaps
y que
then
todas esas
I'm no
cosas,
longer rendered
conversaciones y todo ese
visible.
trabajo del
All of
guión,
these
luego cosas que
conversations that
haces que
everybody has
te
been
hagan tomar
talking
la
about,
decisión de
sometimes you become
diseñador,
invisible because you
productor,
see the results.
pero
You
no del
see the
dramaturgista,
results
¿no?
of the
Entonces,
producer, the
regresándome un
designer, the
poco
director, but
a
not of the
México,
dramaturg's work.
pues rescato esto
So
que
sometimes in
mencionó
Mexico, then
que
this dialogue
mencionó
and the
Marta,
trust and what
porque creo
Martha has
que
pointed out,
en
I
estos
think
procesos
that in these
teatro mexicano tendría
processes
que ser
in
así.
Mexican
Tendría
theater,
que ser
this
a
is
través de
what
la
we need.
escucha, en tanto
It
que
would
no
have to
se
be
conoce. O sea, es
through
más sencillo el
listening and
proceso
learning
con el
about the
dramaturgo,
unknown
con el
part. It's
director,
process
pero
with the
no con las otras
dramaturg, with
áreas.
the
Y
director,
así lo
but not with
pensaba
other
con Patti
areas.
también, que nos
This
decía,
is something
bueno, no
that
sé qué hace, ¿no?
happened with Patty too.
Y ese diálogo y esa
And
escucha pues
that
tendría que ayudar a
dialogue
encontrar ese
would
sentido.
have to help
Y
us
algo que
find
quisiera
meaning
rescatar
here.
también de esa plática fue el momento de lo que mencionaba Patti como
And this
la
is
no
what
unificación.
the
Quizá el director va por un camino y
non-unification
el
here.
productor va por otro
Maybe
camino y el diseñador de
non-harmonizing, the
vestuario al otro
directors
y
on
el
one
escenografía
tack,
otro y
the
así.
designer on
Y el
another.
dramaturgista también puede ser ese
The
mediador,
dramaturg can also be a
porque
mediator,
no
can
es que estemos
harmonize.
pensando
It's
en
not
una
just that we are
visión
thinking
personal o
about a
individual,
personal
sino que
or
estamos sacando
individual
adelante la
vision,
puesta
but
en escena
rather
para el
that
espectador. Y creo que ahí es justo lo
I
que
think that that is
mencionaba
precisely
Fernanda como
what Ana Lola
eso
mentioned,
es
that this is what
importante,
we
necesario
know
tener
as
un
being
dramaturgista
important
porque es una
and
visión global,
necessary,
no
a
es una visión nada más
comprehensive vision,
al
not
aire.
just
Y por último
one
quisiera
that
decir
we're
que
throwing up in the air
justo me
here.
parece importante
So
esto de
precisely, I think that it's
estudiar, porque
important to
también lo
study the
hacen los dramaturgistas que
dialogue.
dicen, es que no me
There are
puedo
other
acercar al
dramaturgs
director,
that say,
no me
look,
puedo acercar al director.
I
Y yo
can't
digo, oh, o
approach the
sea,
director. I
no te
can't
puedes
approach the
acercar, es
actor.
como
What do you mean you
casi
can't
prohibido
approach
porque el
them? It's not
dramaturgista como que dice
forbidden.
cosas
The
malvadas
dramaturg
o raras, ¿no?
is not
Entonces
some
digo,
evil presence here.
todos somos piezas importantes
So we are all
del paquete, ¿no?
important
Y todos salir hacia
players
adelante.
in a
Entonces,
package here.
creo que en
And
tanto
we
se
are all
entienda que
working toward
esto
this
es
one
para
goal. And
algo
this is
completo, para la
for
cuestión
something
creativa,
that
para
is
la cuestión
comprehensive
visual,
in creativity,
pues
not
vale la
just
pena
individually.
avanzar.
And so we must forge ahead.
Muchas gracias, Gaby. ¿A quién le gustaría
Thank you,
responder?
Gabi. You would like to reply to that?
Adelante, Alfredo. Bueno, yo escuchándote, Gaby,
When I listen to
empiezo
you,
a pensar
Gabi,
en
I
esta cuestión
start
de la
thinking of this matter that has to do with the companionship that you offer,
sin dudar en artes escénicas
because In scenic arts, you always have teamwork.
siempre es
You always need the
alguien más
cooperation of others, and you do that for others as well.
acompañamiento.
So that entails
Por
companionship.
ejemplo, me parece que aquí
But I
un
believe that
paso muy
a
trascendente podría ser
very important
acompañarnos
step
entre
would be
dramaturgistas.
to be
Aquí
partners with each other as
nos
dramaturgs.
sucede algo que sería maravilloso y que
Because
creo que
here we
en
don't
una
find
producción
something that would
habría
be
más de un
amazing to have,
dramaturgista,
that is
que las
to have in a
interpretaciones
production more than
tuvieran
just
unas
one
reglas
dramaturg.
aún
That
más
would make
variadas,
that would
aún
ensure
más
that all
eh,
productions on all mise en
pues,
scène would
en
be
términos de hacer
enriched, will
preguntas.
be better, especially when it comes
Justamente
to asking questions. I
es,
believe that
es una cuestión muy humana,
this is
muy
also a very
de
human aspect
enfrentar en equipo,
of
enfrentar
facing
lo
things
que venga.
as a team,
La parte gozosa, la parte en que
press on
estamos
ahead, you know,
todos
even the
aprendiendo
enjoyable
como
parts of it all, you know, knowing that things are
pero en
happening
las
as it
crisis,
should be
sobre
happening.
todo
But
cuando
also when we have a
no sabemos qué
crisis,
hacer,
when
cuando
nobody knows
se
what's going to
voltea
happen,
el
when
plan de trabajo
people look
y
at the
todo
work
parece
plan and it looks
jeroglífico,
as if it were
todo
written in
se
Greek
vuelve confuso y hay que
and
tomar decisiones.
everything becomes confusing and you have to
Pienso
make
que
decisions for that.
una parte indispensable
I
también
believe
de nuestro
that an
trabajo y que a
indispensable
mí en lo
part of it
particular
all, of our work, and
me
that for
resulta
me
extremadamente gratificante,
results quite
es
gratifying,
poder
is
sentirme acompañada, poder
feeling
sentirme
that I have a partners in crime, if you will, working with me hand in hand.
fortalecida,
I feel emboldened,
protegida
protected,
y segura de que
and
las
safe,
cosas van a salir adelante
and certain too
estando con mi
that
equipo.
things will
Me
actually
parece que esta
happen
parte
because I am
metafísica
working with
también
my team, and I
tiene
believe
unas
that
vertientes
this
sumamente maravillosas
companionship of sorts
que
has
podríamos apreciar
very
mucho en esta
important
producción.
aspects that we can appreciate and
Y ya.
harness for our benefit.
Lo poco que quede suficientemente. Son cuestiones prácticas.
These are all practical
Todo lo
matters.
que se está diciendo, yo creo que
From
se
everything that has been said, I believe we can
hablando, por ejemplo, de
see a few
que los
needs.
dramaturgistas hagan grupos.
When we talk about, you
Es
know,
necesario
dramaturgs
establecer
doing
además
things, well, it would be necessary to
objetivos
establish
prácticos que incluso
practical
podrían llegar
objectives and
a
a
hacerse
vision,
como en asociación
objectives that
en
could,
que
in
se
a way,
pueden
even
medir.
strive for a
Ahora que
form of
estaba
legislation. What I'm trying to say
la
is that
diversidad de tareas
when
que
I was
hacemos,
mentioning that the diversity of
la última
tasks
vez que
that we
entregué
perform, well, I thought to
traducción,
myself, the last time I
hacer adaptación,
delivered a specific translation, adaptation, or production, well, I
en
did the
asesoría,
companionship
ensayos,
work, I did the
es
counseling,
decir,
I was also a director, and I did
estoy
translation and the
contribuyendo a
proofreading.
que el
So I'm
propio
contributing so that
lineamiento
the
se
task
reduzca
in and of
y no
itself
como debería dignificarse.
is
Pero es
unfortunately
que
not being
¿qué
recognized.
pasa? Tampoco hay
So what
realmente
happens? Well,
una estructura
there's
de apoyo que
no
sea
structure,
decente como para
support
decir, no, no,
structure that would
esto
be
llega hasta
enough for
aquí
you
y
to tell you, well,
efectivamente es tanto
this is the
tiempo.
limit of your
Porque
tasks.
también
And when you cross that
funciona,
limit,
¿no?
then you have to call yourself
Contrato tal cual,
something
¿no?
different.
Sabemos que en el
Why?
teatro
Because
los
unfortunately,
uno de
theaters
los peores
in
ejemplos
Mexico, and especially
es,
in
es que
companies in Mexico, offer
es que hay que
terrible contracts. The legislation is just terrible. So the other objective that I can think of is that we need find a paradigm shift, something that has to happen from the core, from the education of those people that want to find these spaces for the Mexican theater, telling these people that we do have a cultural baggage that you need to study, that you need can build up a career, that you have to know different processes and productions, but also trying to change the paradigms upward, you know, vertical nature of things that we have explored. We were talking about creating bridges and doors and keys, and I believe that the main key is to change the paradigms, mental paradigms of directors, which is something that has existed in Mexico ever since I started working here a long time ago. We have this idea that the director is this omnipotent, omnimodal figure, and now people are understanding things differently. Even the youngsters are doing things differently, and however, we have yet to find a cohesion, and I hope I live long enough to see the change. I do believe the future will be good,
Muchas
but the
gracias.
present has things that need to be tackled first.
Vamos a la siguiente pregunta
So
con
let's go to the
nuestro
next question
panelista.
with our next
Lugares.
panelist.
Creo que se vincula
I
completamente
believe that
con
this is
la
linked
reflexión que
directly to
usted
the
tuvo
replies that we
en
have
nuestra última pregunta.
been seeing on
¿Qué
this
le puede
last
aportar
question.
a la sociedad,
What can
a
society
a las artes, a nuestra cultura, a nuestra
do
comunidad
to the
como
arts,
dramaturgismo
to our
mexicano?
community, and what can
Pues
dramaturgy give
justamente
to
ese vínculo
society
y ese
in
volver a
Mexico?
colocar el
Well,
teatro
first
en
of this link
en el
of
lugar que
making
debería de
sure that
tener,
the arts,
que
that
muchas
theater
personas
have
de
the place that it
soslayas se
should
deja
be
de lado.
having,
Y lo
and
mismo
things that
solamente
unfortunately are left to the
respecto al
wayside,
otorgamiento de los
especially when we
presupuestos, ¿no?
consider
Siempre
budgeting.
es primero la
Usually,
cuestión de la salud
when it
ahora,
comes
por
to
ejemplo, o del
um,
beneficio social, y parece
healthcare
que el
or social
arte fuera
benefits, they
un
usually go
accesorio.
first.
Parece que
And it
esto
looks as if
viene en
arts
último
was
lugar.
just an
Y creo
ancillary
que no.
to budgeting, that it is just
Hablábamos
the
el día que
last place you
tuvimos
need to
la
explore.
conversación
And I don't believe that is the case.
de
When we
la
had
última vez,
conversations with the
justamente
Puentes
que
panel,
este lugar
the
de
last
las
time we
artes es
understood that
fundamental.
arts
¿Por
are
qué?
fundamental.
Porque de la otra manera
Why?
se
Because
piensa solo en la
otherwise
vida
you would
biológica,
think
es
only
decir,
of
la
preserving
vida que puede
biological
tener una
life. That
planta
is,
o
the
un
life
animal
that
que
you
es
see in a
importante
plant or
para la
an
vida de
animal.
toda
And
la
they are
humanidad.
important, don't get me wrong,
Pero el ser
like
humano
that of a
como
human
tal,
being. But
creo que
human
algo
beings have
más tiene que
something that
ver
is
con
different.
una
That has to
sensibilidad
do with
otra
a
vez con los afectos, con
sensitivity,
una
with
posibilidad
the
de
feelings that you
elaboración
have, the possibility
simbólica,
of
y desde esa
symbology, in
perspectiva
a
es donde
symbological
entra el
manner,
arte.
create
El arte
yourself. And
hace
this
la
is where
diferencia.
arts
Y en
comes
esa
in.
medida, si no queremos ser solo
And
plantas
if
y
we are
no
not
queremos
going to be
ser solo
just
animales, si
plants
no
or
queremos ser
just
reducidos
animals,
solo a
and if we
una
do
vida
not want to be
biológica,
reduced to a
necesitamos arte.
simple form
El
of
arte para
biological life, we
entender
need
los
arts
dolores que
to
acontecen en un
understand the
mundo y en
pain
ese
that
sentido este
society goes
país,
through. And in this
como
sense,
en muchas partes,
in
porque
this country,
yo
like
no lo
many
veo
others
solamente
around the world, but
focalizando en
specifically
México y me voy a
as
atrever a
we
extenderlo un poco
focus
más
on
hacia América
Mexico and
Latina.
maybe to Latin America as
Hemos
well,
vivido
we
contextos
have gone
verdaderamente
through very
difíciles,
difficult
duros,
contexts that
de mucha
have been hard,
violencia, de
involved in
una
violence,
asimetría social muy
a
fuerte,
social
y de
asymmetry that has
pronto
been very pronounced. And
es reducida, la verdad, la
to
vida de las
reduce
personas a
the
una
life of
fungibilidad
people to whether they are
inmensa.
expendable or
El
not
arte no.
is
Y lo
just
que
wrong.
quisiéramos
And art
pensar, y
doesn't
es
do
que
that.
eso es lo que
What we need to
nosotros
think of is
aportamos,
that
esa
that
gran
is
diferencia.
exactly what we provide, that
Y
great
desde la
differential.
tarea del
And
dramaturgista es
from the
justamente
task of the
poner
dramaturg themselves,
en el centro
we
y
say that we
visibilizar
need
con
to
miles de luces
center
pues esa
and
tarea
give
tan importante
visibility
que
to
es
this
lo que
very
sucede
important task.
en las
That
artes.
is,
No es
everything
un
that
plus
happens in
para la obra,
arts,
es
it
algo
is not
vital.
an
Lo que aquí
ancillary
estamos
issue. It
jugando
is something
es
that is
la
actually
salud
vital.
mental de nuestra
What we are
población,
put
no
into play
solamente la
is the
salud
mental
física,
health
sino la
of our
salud
population,
mental,
not just the
un
physical
equilibrio,
well-being,
una
but actual
posibilidad
mental
de
health, an
pensar en lo
equilibrium, the
simbólico,
possibility
de
of thinking of
creer que
things as
sobre este
symbols,
escenario
of
aparece
understanding that in on the
Hamlet y
stage
sobre
you
este
have maybe
escenario
Hamlet,
de
and
un
on the
momento a otro
stage
es un castillo,
from
pero
one
el
moment
segundo
to another
siguiente se
it can be
convierte
a
en un
castle and then
desierto
it turns
o en
into a
una
desert
selva.
or a
Esa
jungle.
posibilidad que nos
This
permite
possibility that is
movernos
brought
con
about
esa
of through
flexibilidad es
moving with this
completamente
flexibility
importante. Y
is
pensar, y
extremely
esto
important.
ya para cerrar y no
And
tomar
in order
demasiado la
to
palabra,
conclude and not to
pensar
take
en el
much
otro.
of your time, we
Creo que eso
have to
es
think of the other.
fundamental. Ese es el
And I
trabajo
believe
del
this is fundamental.
dramaturgista.
This is the work of the
Pensar en que
dramaturg,
no
to think
solamente lo que sucede
not
sobre el
only that
escenario
everything that happens on
solamente es
stage
el campo de los
matters.
artistas,
It is not just a
sino que
field in which
nuestra
the
razón de
artists
ser
work
tiene
in,
que
but
ver con
that
el otro,
our
con
raison
considerar el otro.
d'être
Yo pongo un
has to do with
ejemplo
the consideration of
siempre
others.
muy
I
práctico y
put a
muy
very
sencillo,
practical
que es que
example that is
uno de mis
actually very
compañeros me
simple.
decía, es
And that is that
dificilísimo
one of our
ver
peers
teatro,
was telling me
un
that it would
filósofo,
be very
yo le decía, claro
difficult
que no es
to
lo más
read
sencillo,
theater. And I
antes
told
era
him that's not the
sencillísimo de
case. I
filosofía,
believe
y
it
me
is even
decía,
harder
no,
to
te voy
read
a decir dónde
philosophy.
está la
And
dificultad de leer
I'm going to
teatro,
tell you
es que en
what
una
the
línea
difficulty of reading theater
eres un
that is
victimario,
that
y en la
in one line
siguiente
you will
línea
be
eres
a
la
criminal,
víctima.
and in the
¿Cómo te
next
mueves en
line
esa
you will be the
flexibilidad
victim.
para
And
poder
how do you
ponerte
move
en los
through
zapatos de
this
uno y del
flexibility
otro?
of putting
Y
yourself in the
creo
shoes
que
of
ese
one
lugar
person
a mí
or
por lo
the
menos
other?
me
And I
parece
believe that that
fundamental y
place
eso
is
lo tengo
fundamental,
delante, que
and that is
podamos
something that that only art give you. From this place, you can feel the pain of others. You can feel that you can do more for them. And from this, place to find all these connections. And through going through these borders that have to do with the specific locations in which theater happens, and this hierarchy of theater, that whether you have a cult like theater or maybe public theater, this paradigm shift that had been pointed out by Alfredo are fundamental to understand and how see that these structures work and see where those loopholes in which we can engage into directly and create connections with. That would be fundamental to me. Thank you, Rocio. Would like to add to that. I honestly, what you said completely moved me. This question of whether you are getting out of the cultural sector and understanding what is our place in the world. And I hear you, and I say to myself, exactly that. Where do we find empathy? Where do we develop our emotional intelligence and develop that sensitivity? In some sense, we see the decision makers, those who do public policies. And I believe that could be a faraway example, but it's actually quite close. Like, for instance, when the FIFA was sanctioning the Mexican team for engaging in homophobic cheering, and you see all the people involved in FIFA having these types of conversations and at an abstract level, and what they don't understand is that you, or where you are as a collective, where do you see these spaces of empathy? Where do you see these spaces of knowing where this violence might come from, this learned performed violence that happens in public places or stadiums? Are we going to create official and public policies just to tackle that? We can do whatever you want. All the social sciences and natural sciences can be there. But if we do not understand our existence in terms of consciousness, of awareness, of our own intelligence and spirit and effective intelligence, then it will be impossible for all these things to change from the root. And this is when you see that things are actually vital. This is the space, the physical space in which these things happen, in which this creative dialogue actually happens. And for me, listening to you made it very clear to me. That role that we're performing is very clear. And we as dramaturgs, we are the people who create this connection when we forget we have the team, the space, and this is what we're doing. And we find ourselves in a rather ample spectrum.
Claro, pero, bueno, no pero, o sea,
Yes.
pero siempre es nada más como una introducción.
This is just,
Cierto,
it
afuera
is
sí
very
tenemos
true.
posibilidad
We need to
de
have this view from the outside inward
pero
and impact ourselves, but it usually
sí, el
starts from
dramaturgista
home.
tiene esta
The
otra
dramaturg
importantísima
has this
habilidad,
very
además
important
la
first
responsabilidad de hacer un cambio
responsibility
adentro de la
to change from within,
anécdotas.
to enact
O
change
sea,
from within.
un
I'll give you
director
just an anecdote. A
pa,
director, let's say, and
¿no?
I deliver the product.
Con el
I
texto.
am very happy with the text,
Y de repente me lo devuelve
and then the director brings it
no,
back
una semana
to me,
después.
maybe a week later through email,
Espantosa.
and he butchered the whole thing. And I tell him, "Well, what are you doing?" And then he tells me, "If I were not to appropriate myself of this text, then I can't do anything to do it with it." And I tell him, "Well, you can't appropriate yourself with things you don't understand." And then we engage in a very important conversation, and I tell him, "Well, you know what? Let's discuss this while eating in a meal. You have to understand this is not the case. Why? Because you don't know what we're talking about, even." And that is one of the very first experiences in which you tell yourself, well, your authority is not over my own authority. And what you're trying to do with this text and present that to the public, then that would finish, that would be the finishing touch to a project that I generated alongside an actress. And this is a part of my work as a dramaturg that is actually not a dramaturg, and to offer to the audience something that would be of lower quality. He understood that, and that was one of the best plays in which I have participated. But you have to strike first.
Y
strike
entonces
the iron while it's hot.
es una obra que era
And
realmente una gran obra
this is a
para
play that was actually very
tener
good, that
una
was
conciencia extraordinaria
made for women, and that
que
would
cada
shed light
mujer
into
que habló
the
conmigo
female
su
condition,
experiencia acerca de ese producto,
because every woman that talked
absolutamente
about their experience in this
participar en
play
semejante producto,
were very happy to participate in a project that would have been different had I
entonces
allowed the director
creo
to
que
do
piensa
his
bien, sobre el
pleasing.
dramaturgista tiene que estar
So
muy
this is
preparado para
why
dar más,
change has to happen from
ser
within. The
mejor
dramaturg has to be
y
prepared to
impactar
exert
diferente.
authority at the level in which
Muchas
they
gracias.
need it.
Qué exactitud.
Yeah, that was very precise. Indeed.
Bueno, vamos con nuestra última
Now let's
pregunta.
go with our last question of the day,
Brenda, bueno, ya les mencioné,
and
ha estado trabajando
has been
muchísimo
working
para
quite a lot
que LMDA México
to
suceda.
make sure that
Estemos
LMDA
hoy
Mexico
aquí,
actually happens,
pues
to
todos los
find each
todos
other
reunidos.
here.
Y, y bueno, ya se mencionó
And
muchísimo,
we have mentioned a
se han
lot,
mencionado muchísimas cosas
many
sobre
things
qué
on
aún falta hacer,
what
pero
is
quiero
still
preguntar,
missing
Brenda,
to do. But
Brenda, ¿qué
this
falta por
question
hacer en
for
México?
you, what is still
Preguntas
missing to do
difíciles.
in
Exacto.
Mexico? I believe that is the
Em,
hardest question of them
He
all.
estado tomando notas,
I
como
have been
cualquier
taking a few notes,
dramaturgista lo
like
hubiera hecho,
any good
escuchando a sus
dramaturg would have
maestros y a
done,
sus
by
colegas.
listening to their colleagues and
Y,
teachers.
y,
And
em, creo que lo que Lourdes
I
dice del
believe that what Lourdes
acompañamiento
has been saying
es
regarding
algo bien
this
importante
companionship
que fue
nature
lo que
affair is
revisamos
something that is
internamente
important
a la hora de estar planeando
to
puentes.
remember,
Nuestro
especially
fellowship no era
when
un
something that we
dramaturgista
talked
haciendo una
about when we
entrevista
were
de nada
having
más o
a
platicando con
dialogue
alguien
with
de qué opina del
Puentes.
producto.
You
Era
have
una
to,
dupla de dramaturgistas
in a couple
haciendo
of
juntos un
dramaturgs
proyecto.
being part of a particular project,
Entonces,
we talked about
creo que
these
ahí
affairs.
vamos, ¿no?
And I
Estamos
believe that we are
todavía
going in the right
recién
direction.
loading.
We're still, loading,
Dos,
if you will.
estudiar las estructuras.
Two, you
No
have to
tengo ni
study
idea
the
cómo hacer
structures. I
eso.
don't know
Tenemos aquí a
exactly how to do that,
dramaturgista
but we have Alfredo Monesi
ayudándonos.
to help us with that.
¿Qué hay que hacer en México?
So what do we
¿Qué
need to do in
falta en
Mexico?
México?
What is still missing?
No tengo ninguna certeza,
I
pero
have
creo
no
que esto,
certain
equipo,
answer, but I
colaboración,
believe that what's missing is exactly
escucharnos,
this.
abrazarnos,
Teamwork, collaboration, to embrace each other,
hablar con la gente,
to
sí
talk to
siempre
the people.
nombrarnos,
Yes, of course, we have to call each
archivar,
other
¿no?
by name,
Documentarse,
to
inscripción, porque
file
sí
things and
hubo trabajo de
record
un
them,
dramaturgista aquí.
to let people know
Como
that
bien
the
dice
work
Lourdes,
of a
a veces no
dramaturg
se
actually
nota,
happened, because sometimes
pero está
you
ahí.
can't
Y para
even
que
tell
luego
that it
cuando
happened,
uno
but it's
siente
actually
que es
there.
bonito,
So that the people on the
lo de
front lines
atrás
can actually see
a
that.
veces son unas
For
inscripciones muy
things to
lindas, y te
happen
veo a ti porque
really
te
well, you
encantan las
see that there is a
inscripciones,
background
pero a
work.
veces son unas inscripciones que
Sometimes you
hay que
see
volverlas
these
como día tras día
credits
y otra vez
in
volverlas a hacer
a
y otra
program
vez.
that has to happen and happen
Em,
every time, so that you can see that work
Colaboración,
has been done.
conversaciones,
Conversation,
nombrarnos, archivarnos.
collaboration, naming each
No sé
other,
ustedes qué piensan,
uh,
creo que seguir adelante. De
recording,
verdad
and
los
call each
volteo
other
a
by
ver
name.
porque no sé,
And I believe
no sé dónde
I
estamos
look at you because I
fallando.
don't know
Entonces,
exactly what needs to happen. This is
seguirnos
something that
haciendo
we're discovering
preguntas,
together. We need to
ver
keep
puentes porque tiene
asking
cosas súper
questions.
interesantes, la
You
verdad.
have to look
Sí
into
es
the
un
Puentes
placer honor que
program,
es dramaturgista.
because it provides a one-on-one
Em,
as to what dramaturgy is all about.
no tengo ni la menor idea. ¿Me quieren ayudar,
And I have no
dramaturgistas?
idea,
¿Quieren
honestly.
acompañarme en el
Please
proceso
help
de
me,
responder esta
dramaturg
pregunta?
colleagues, you fellow dramaturgs.
Brenda.
Please help me with this.
Perdón, crear una visión propia.
To create
Porque de
an
repente vemos este
individual
asunto
vision, because sometimes we
en
see
Estados Unidos, en
the United
Alemania, en
States,
donde
in
sea, pero
Germany,
no
in other places
estamos
in
con
which
esos países
we do not find
y algo
ourselves. And I believe
muy
that
lindo que ha sucedido ahora
a very
es
important thing that has been happening
ver cómo
is
han sido los procesos
recognizing how the processes have
porque
been
efectivamente
happening
no hay
here,
condiciones
recognizing
de
that we don't
trabajo
have the optimal
y de
conditions
educación
for
y
work,
que ahora
career, and for
estamos
education, that
trabajando todos para que eso
regardless of this, we're
suceda
engaging
y
in
hay una
dialogue to
visión
make sure that it actually happens, and
de
that
cómo es
there is a
posible
clear
ser
vision as to
dramaturgista
how
en
you
México
can
y
empower
algo que
your
comparto
the
con
dramaturg in Mexico.
Rocío
And
es esta
something
visión
that
de
I
plasmar
talk with Rocio all the time about is
en papel nuestros
alighting
pensamientos porque
our thoughts and put
pues
them
aquí
into
no existen
papers,
puentes, ¿no? O
because
sea, yo
we
una
do
de las
not
cosas
have
con las que me enfrento mucho cuando
bridges
estoy
per se. One
impartiendo
of the many
clases en
problems that I
universidades
find when I'm doing my
enfocadas a la
workshops,
labor del dramaturgista
especially
es
focused
que
in
no
the
tengo fuentes,
work
o sea, no
of
hay fuentes
the
de nadie, así
dramaturg, is
como
that I
de
usually don't have
ay,
sources.
lean a Lessing
I can tell you, oh, read Lessing or read
pero no
whoever,
hay alguien así
whoever.
como de lean
You
a
don't
Camilo
have
de
a
Santiago, ¿no? O sea,
specifically a person, you can say, read Erendira, Marta, Rocio. It is quite strange that we have yet to generate our own sources to engage in dialogue from our own thoughts. We have to make sure that things are being brought to paper and stop thinking of what is happening in other countries. Of course, we can use them as a reference, but we need to question them
Sí,
and use
sí me ayuda
ourselves as a
muchísimo.
reference
O
as
sea, creo
well.
que lo que
I don't know if that helps.
va a
Yes, it
hacer
does
la
help. I
dramaturgización de
believe that what will
México
make
es
of
algo que va a ocurrir aquí en
dramaturgy great
México.
in
O sea,
Mexico
no
is
puede
something that will happen
conjugarse con
specifically in
el
Mexico.
significado.
You
No
cannot,
existe.
just grab something from
O sí,
elsewhere and
no.
cut it and paste
Pero
it
creo
here
que
in
lo
Mexico.
que
Or maybe
dices,
yes, that can
hacerlo
happen.
desde México,
But
para
we have to
México
strive to
y
do that
mantener
in
estas
Mexico
conversaciones
for
abiertas, que
Mexico
es
and to keep this
como
conversation
feedback súper necesario.
open. That
Que
is
aunque
very
no tenemos
necessary feedback. And
textos
although we don't
sinónimos en
have
español, ya tenemos los
bibliography, at
tuyos,
least
ya tenemos lo de Ere, ya
in
tenemos el
Mexico,
trabajo que hace Marta,
we
ya tenemos
have
el
your
trabajo
own
que hace
work, the work
Paola,
done by
ya tenemos
Eri,
lo
by
que hace
Ana Lola, by
Luisa,
Alfredo, by Lourdes, by
esto va a quedar
everybody.
grabado, así que pueden
Going to
regresar
stay
a esto cuando quieran.
recorded. This will be recorded, so you can go back to
Pero
it
creo que también,
as you
regresando a lo
please.
que dices de Lessing, o sea,
But going back to what you
vaya, claro
said
que
on
está ahí, ¿no?
Lessing,
Existe y
well,
está ahí,
it's
puede uno
there.
también decir, no lo
It
vamos a
is
mantener porque en
there for
México se
it,
hace
and we
diferente.
can't say that we're not going to look
Sería
into it
una
because we do
tontería, o
things
sea,
different in
sería
Mexico.
ponernos el
That would
pie.
be
Creo que
foolish
hay
of
que ver
us.
de
We
todo.
believe
Que
that we
justo
have to
recordando
take
algo,
from everywhere in
ahora que
order to
mencionaste
achieve that.
Lessing, o sea,
Now that you've
lo
mentioned
hablo
nesting,
porque
I say that
siempre
because
que pregunto, ¿alguien
every
sabe quién
time
es
I ask,
Lessing? Dicen,
somebody
Lessing
knows
es
who
un
Lessing
músico.
is, and they usually
Y
go,
entonces
"What? Who is
me
that?"
altera un poco el
And
pensar que
that
sí
makes
tenemos
me
el
a
deseo
bit
tal vez de
angsty
saber
as
qué es
to, well, we
cierta
know
dramaturgia,
exactly what a
pero podemos
dramaturgy
hablar muy
is,
bien en
but if
México
we do
y
not
estamos
know the
perdidos. No
origins
sé si
of
en el
it, then
tablero
we're
se ve
lost. I don't know if you, when you were studying
o tú
at the
escuchaste por ahí a
university,
los
did you
maestros,
ever
a ti, Marta, te
listen to
tocó,
your
porque a mí
teachers
nunca me tocó
saying,
hablar de Lessing, no me tocó hablar
well,
de
who's Lessing? I never
entonces
really had
creo
that
que es
experience,
justo
and
también
I
algo muy interesante
believe
saber
that this
cómo
is
un
also an
documento de
important
hace
thing.
muchos
How a
años no se ha
document from
tratado, ¿no?
centuries ago
Partiendo desde
has
ahí,
yet to be
la
touched
primera
upon, and coming
traducción
from that,
al
the very
español
first translation
de la
into
gramática de
Spanish
Hamburgo en México fue
from
en
the Hamburg
1997,
dramaturgy
creo.
in
O sea, hace
Mexico actually
muchísimos
happened in
años.
1997.
Entonces,
And these are
creo que
centuries
es
that were
empezar
never
a
truly
reapropiar y
explored.
eso,
So we
y
have to
ahora, si
reappropriate
puedo
that.
hablar tanto,
And I'm sorry for
las
taking
traducciones me
holding
parece que también
the
son
microphone, but I
importantes
believe
porque
that
buscar
translation
la
are
traducción
also very
correcta
important.
es
Finding a
otra onda,
correct
o sea, de
translation
lo que
is yet
significa
another
dramaturgo y
field.
dramaturgista, porque pues no hay
Usually translate
traducción de
dramaturge
otras
into playwright, for
traducciones,
instance, so
entonces,
there's no
bueno,
actual
regresamos a
clarity
esto,
as to the
ya tú acá.
what the terminology
No,
entails.
por desgracia me hace pensar en un
That
problema
unfortunately makes me think
de
of a
dimensiones
problem
tan
of
grandes como son las deficiencias
very
educativas.
large volumes, that is the
Porque
deficiencies
si
that we
Mahoma
find in
no va a la
education in
montaña,
our
pues la
country.
montaña tendrá que
Because if
ir a Moisés.
Muhammad doesn't go to the mountain,
Si no hay traducciones de esto o
if the
aquello,
mountain doesn't go to
evitamos
Muhammad, then the mountain goes
la
to the
equitación, la
Muhammad goes to the
educación
mountain.
suficiente
Why?
en el
Because we do
acceso
not
a todas
have
las lenguas,
sufficient
que es
linguistic
fundamental para la educación universitaria.
education. We do sometimes we don't even have access to other languages, which is
Y
a
para todas las
fundamental aspect
profesiones,
for
no estamos hablando
education
nada más de
at every
dramaturgia
level and for
ni de
every
literatura
profession. And this is
ni
not
de
just
nada. O
about
sea,
theater and
yo
dramaturgy.
creo
I
firmemente que
believe
ahora un ingeniero
strongly that an
tiene que
engineer
tener acceso a otros
of
idiomas.
certain
Y en
repute
general los
has to
programas
have
para
access
catalogar
to
esto
these
en
types
nuestra
of
universidad, por
texts.
ejemplo,
And
son
in our university, the programs
no
that we have
únicamente deficientes,
are
sino
not only
mal
deficient,
pensados.
but also very ill
Para responder
conceived.
exámenes, no
They
para
only work to make sure that you can answer
y
maybe
este es el tipo de cosa que se
an
tiene que
exam,
aprender
and
desde
that's it, a
memoria,
test, and that's it, that you
pero
can
no
take a
nos, o
test.
sea, no es exactamente
And
lo que
this
nos
is the
corresponde a nosotros.
work that we
Sí
need
es una
to do
deficiencia
from the
para
base
aquellos
of the
que
pyramid.
ya en
This is a
materia
deficiency
específica
that
requieren
happens
de
specifically for those who want to
textos, porque la
be part of these
bibliografía
aspects,
es
because the bibliography in the end
impresionante. O sea, la verdad es que es
is
impresionante la
actually
cantidad de
quite
fuentes.
large.
Sí
There's a
hay,
lot of
y
sources of
yo cuando
information. There are
trato de dar
books out
ejercicios
there.
de mis
And usually, when I have my
segundo
students
año de
with
este
me, now that this is
doctorado,
the second
pues
year
una de las
of
cosas que hago
teaching that
fue
I have, I
preguntarles
usually
así al departamento de
give
inglés.
all these texts to my
Resulta
students. Why?
que
Because they were part of the English department, and it
de
turns
mis
out that
alumnos no
80% of my
se
students
sienten
have
bien
no access to that, or they
y
feel a
habría que
little
crear un
weak
equipo de
when it
puente
comes to engaging into
que
it. We
pueda
have to create bridges.
les
That
ayude
is,
a entrar
people
más
that might
fácilmente a
help
estos textos y
those
poder
that can't access it, they have to provide that access to them,
finalmente
create these connections,
esto
and
de
so
la
that
pandemia es
you
un
can
poco
come in to
difícil,
learn.
pero
However, through the
hay que
pandemic, this has
echarle
been made a little
ganas
harder, sure, but you have to be ingenious about it. So the deficiencies from the base up, unfortunately, has is something that we have we catch onto, and has to do with what Rocio was mentioning as part of our task. Um, if you want to contribute to this, you will do that. Will do so. And I want to mention that this is also a process that is still very incipient because we have Marta, who is in the translation process of Michael Chalmers' book that is going to be released in the Epistemologia editorial. And that I believe that is also important because if the book of Michael Chalmers, which is a basic text in the States for the work of the dramaturg, is not known here, well, I believe that Marta, another Mexican dramaturg, is not only translating it, but they're also remaking that for a Mexican context. And I believe these are contexts that are actually happening. And it is also important, as I said, to publish many things. We have a wonderful theater magazine in Mexico who can describe what we do. We actually wrote an article together, Mauricio and myself, talked about our working relationship. We, produced a play. So we have to force it in a way because it is important to make sure that this is understood and that there's an example out there of what the things are actually happening. But all in all, I want to thank Marta for what you're doing. And in this sense, I want to question the premise of the question because the word a lack is something that we're missing, is something that we're actually fully bereft of, or that this is a deficiency, an actual deficiency. And I believe that part of what truly makes me think of what Gabi is saying is that we do not need to compare ourselves to others. And I believe that every process is that. The dramaturg in Mexico is exactly what the dramaturg in Mexico has to be today. And we're not going to stand still because you never are supposed to stand still. So we're supposed to enact movement and go further than just thinking of our lacks or the things we are bereft of. What Alfredo was saying, for instance, the access to different languages and accessing, and for me, translating this, having a course in dramaturgy for the theater faculty would mean that I would give a bibliography to the students that had no access to it. And we need to fix that problem, not only in my translation, but also in the classroom. And we work like this. I ask the people who has access to the text. Well, one of you will read, the other will translate, and the other person will do something new with the text, even though they don't have access to it directly. So, and that's okay. We always have these bridges that we can form. And this profile that is being given to us, of those of us who have the privilege of accessing other languages, we sometimes forget or we take it for granted, or we even sidestep ourselves with how we interfere linguistically speaking with ourselves. And sometimes we don't listen to what we're saying. If you think things from a different perspective and engaging in a dialogue with that, maybe things might change. So for me, the person I trust the most when checking my translation is somebody that has no access into the target language, because there will be the person that will detect something that it hits the ear wrong and that doesn't sound correct, and saying that there is something missing or that there is a lack of something makes me sad, instead of saying, well, we as a collective, where are we heading, or where should we head for? And we find ourselves in this process. We're never too old or never too young or never too this or that, and want to make sure that this part is being conveyed because I get excited about it. I don't want to give you this idea of that being bereft of something. We live in a world of such abundance, and I want to no longer have that idea of being bereft of things and put ourselves in this perspective
Gracias
of
por la
being
lección de
abundant.
dramaturgismo.
Thank you for this lesson in dramaturgy.
Gracias. Oigan, me
Thank
toca
you.
hacer otra vez, pues,
Okay,
y decirles que se nos ha acabado el
it's
tiempo.
my turn now
Quiero
to be the
agradecer mucho, de
dramaturg and
verdad,
tell
es un
you that we are out of time. I have so enjoyed this. Inhabiting and sharing this space with you has been so great. We can continue our talk outside of here. So let's do away with the border. Let's make sure that our conversation can be ongoing for those who are present here, for those who are on the other side of the screen as well. We have hashtags, we have websites, we have a lot of channels through which we can communicate one with another. And I have to recognize that I was very fortunate and I had a wonderful teacher who is always present in my mind and heart. Whenever Marta Turis, who isn't here right now, but who is in episode number 1 of Puentes, if you have a chance, take a look at it. And if you want to continue this conversation, go to the Puentes website. Thank you, each and every one of you. We thank you.